I tried my first ever video. I tried to edit out like the 6 seconds of me coughing, and what I accidentally did was I just edited everything but me coughing. So people like, said, "Hey, you have a YouTube video now. It's just you coughing for 6 seconds." And so it's like kind of shows you why I'm like not a little shy about editing anything. Okay, so welcome back to Orthodoxy 101. It's nice to be together again and to talk about these important things and to learn about our faith. We are going to be talking about extraterrestrials, aliens, creatures that possibly exist. They possibly live in outer space. Well, we're going to get into all of that. What are they? How we should think about them? But like I said, we're going to extract a more general spiritual lesson from it as well. And in particular, what we're going to be doing is, I was telling everyone who got here earlier, but maybe some of you didn't hear. Originally, when I thought of this topic, I was like approaching it from a more like broader philosophical sense of what if there's some other types of intelligent life out there. But what more people wanted to talk about is the UFO phenomenon. So what if they exist and they're in contact with us? And these are related questions, but they're not the same. So we're going to talk about the first things first, reading the letter of St. Theophan the Recluse, which I'll get to in a minute. Just talking about more generally, broadly, the concept, what if some intelligent life is out there somewhere, even if we're not in contact with it? And then we're gonna talk, and then we're gonna more narrowly treat with the UFO phenomenon in particular. What do we do with all of these claimed UFO sightings, abductions, this, that, and the other? What does it mean? Is it real? And how are we supposed to think about it as Orthodox Christians? So that's what we're going to do. So the first thing is that we're going to be reading one of the letters of St. Theophan the Recluse. This is St. Theophan the Recluse, if you want to just visualize him. St. Theophan the Recluse. You can pass it down or not. But St. Theophan the Recluse is one of my favorite spiritual writers. He has a very interesting story. So he was a Russian bishop in the 1800s. And what's super interesting about his story, in my opinion, is that he was really just good at like everything he did. He just succeeded at everything. So he was born in the province of Orlov, but he had eventually worked his way up, got an academic career in the St. Petersburg Academy. So he was a professor of religion or philosophy, something of that nature. But then he wanted to become a monk, so he became a monk. So he was good in academia, but he wanted more than that, so he became a monk. He was really good as a monk, so they sent him on part of the Russian mission to the Near East, where he served in Jerusalem and Constantinople, where he also distinguished himself. So they brought him back and made him a bishop, where he was really successful as a bishop, first in the province of Tambov, and then later moved up to the province of Vladimir. But even though he was so good at, he was super beloved by his flock, he wanted to devote more time to spiritual writing, so he resigned from he remained a bishop, but resigned from his episcopal duties so he could devote full time to his spiritual writing. He became like an instant bestseller in spiritual writing and was very popular, and all of his books sold out really rapidly. And he decided he didn't want to do that anymore. So he was gradually receding from life in the world until the last 20 years of his life he spent pretty much entirely in seclusion, which is why his name is St. Theophan the Recluse. He lived in a hut in the woods, only interacting with his confessor and his cell attendant, who is like the lower level monk who, helps him, like his disciple. And celebrating the divine liturgy every single day, which, it might be hard to visualize, but it's actually taxing on you. Mo Gunn sounds like my kind of guy. Yeah, I love St. Theophan. Like he's this is one of the reasons I wanted to bring him in. He's one of my favorite writers because he was just amazing. Like he's one, and I've brought this up in our previous classes, but like throughout the generations, there always pop up like these really exceptional people in the Orthodox Church, and God uses them for like a particular purpose. We talked about Saint Nicodemus the Hagiorite, who was like, by all accounts, like a genius with a photographic memory, like something above and beyond an ordinary intellect. And a lot of the church fathers, the ancient church fathers, were the same way. So it's just really, I love these kinds of people. They're fascinating to me. He was just good at everything, but he didn't want to be good at anything. He just wanted to live in the woods and pray to God. And during his time in seclusion, he corresponded with many people, receiving and responding to 20 to 40 letters a day. So even though he was living in the woods apart from society, he had already kind of built this following and was so insanely popular, and he felt it was his duty. not to let all these people down. So even though he was living in seclusion, he was very much interacting with the world outside. And this correspondence is the basis of a lot of his popular books. He wrote a book called The Spiritual Life and How to Be Attuned to It, which is just a collection of his letters to a young woman who he eventually guides to becoming a nun. It's like the ABCs of Orthodox spiritual life. I love it. I think it's a fantastic book. Strongly recommend it. You can find it anywhere. But his letters are the basis of a lot of his books. St. Theophan the Recluse. And just sort of as a side note, St. Theophan the Recluse is someone we can sort of label as a modern day church father. The church father, these are the titans of our faith. These are the people who sort of define orthodoxy. And a church father typically combines education and erudition with deep spiritual experience. They typically produce a lot of books and writings of a theological nature, and they're often bishops. And I say this to make a particular point, is that we have many elders, we have many holy men. So you can think of like St. Paisios, St. Porphyrios, if you're familiar with them, Elder Gabriel or Babadze, I'm thinking of recent times. These we rightly refer to them as fathers, because they're monks or priests, and that's appropriate. And they're saints and they're holy, but most of the time they're not fathers in exactly the same way that the church fathers were fathers. In that the elders typically have deep spiritual and ascetic experience. Oftentimes they've been deified. They have this sort of supernatural character, but it's even more, these people are rare. It's even more rare you have someone like this, and they're also extremely educated, and they write a lot. So like St. Porphyrios, really holy man, incredible spiritual gifts, but he didn't really write anything, and he certainly didn't get involved in any big theological controversies. St. Silouan, same sort of thing. He wrote kind of one book, but didn't really get involved in major theological discussions. So there's a bit of a difference between an elder who is just someone who's extremely holy and wise, but not necessarily with this sort of theological mind, and then there's a church father who's more educated. It doesn't really matter, the distinction for our purposes, but I'm just like making that clear because a lot of times I think we kind of blur those lines. Okay, so the writing we'll read today is a letter St. Theophan wrote to a disciple, and I think it serves as a good guide to dealing with the subject of alien life in particular, and more generally about doubts about the faith. And you're going to see why in a minute. So I'm going to link it to you. For all of those who are present in video, I'm going to link it to you in the chat. And so you can just click on it. Let me know if the link's not working, but we're just going to read it together. And talk about it. So, all right. You guys ready? Does everyone have it up? Okay. So this is St. Theophan writing to one of his disciples, writing to one of the people he corresponds with. With great pleasure, I am ready to tell you a word or two to dispel your misunderstandings. You are sure that all the celestial bodies are inhabited with sentient beings, and that these beings tend to do evil just like us. We can even say they are fallen. Thus, they have a need in certain means for their salvation, and that this entails a wonderful arrangement of death and the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. It follows that you have an intractable problem. How could Jesus Christ be the Savior for them? Could it be so that he was incarnate, suffered, and died in every one of those worlds? You cannot solve this problem, and this situation bothers you and shakes your faith in the divine economy of our salvation. So this is the background of this. We're talking the late 1800s, and telescopes are getting better. And one part of this, I don't know if this is the specific issue at hand, but people are seeing formations on Mars that they think are like canals. So you have these theories starting to develop. I don't know how mainstream they ever were, but they really were discussed that maybe there's a whole civilization on Mars. These things look like there's a civilization up there. Okay, what does that mean for us? Spoiler alert, turns out there weren't. There's no life on Mars as far as we know. But at the time, it seemed real. And that's what's interesting about, and it was discussed in, high society educated circles. That's what's interesting, is that St. Theophan can talk about things like this. And that he's, in the loop enough to, anyway, sort of know about it. And this is obviously, it's causing a lot of consternation to this individual. I don't know if it's a woman or a man. I think for some reason I think it's a woman, but I might be wrong about that. But she's obviously very upset about this, and she's like, okay, well, if there's life on other planets, it's disturbing for a Christian, certainly, because we do, even though the Bible never really says there's no life on other planets, really doesn't weigh in on the subject at all. it certainly seems to imply that we are the specialist creatures God ever created. And so it would be a surprise if we found creatures just as special as us. Again, that it just the fact of the if one day we did discover aliens or something, it wouldn't like disprove the existence of God or undo our faith or anything, but it's not what we would expect. It's not what we would predict. So it would be quite surprising, and it would be disturbing as well, I think. And so St. Theophan is trying to set her right. The fact that such thoughts bother you is your own fault. I love that line. For it happens not because of the character of these thoughts. They're just a chain of dreams, which cannot be true at all, while the divine economy is true. There is no way we can let these thoughts shatter your faith. Although you keep the idea about the beings from the other worlds in mind for a long time, and there are many arguments for it, it is still just a probable assumption. It is very unlikely that there are inhabitants, yet still somewhat likely. You have no right to state firmly, yes, there are, until you personally make sure that there are certain beings. To be more accurate, I should say it is possible that they exist, but it is also possible that they do not. Think about navigators. A navigator comes to an island, and everything points to the fact that there must be some inhabitants. However, when he gets ashore, he sees nothing. Alternatively, just think about the ancient times when people have not multiplied yet. At every turn, you could meet the signs of undeniable habitability, while there were no inhabitants at all. The same is with celestial bodies. There are plenty of hints that they are inhabited. What is more interesting is that whether they are still waiting for their inhabitants or whether there will be none at all, who knows what the Lord's will is concerning them. We need to visit these worlds and make sure before they say firmly, there they are. Otherwise, we cannot say more than probably. So this is one thing I love just about St. Theophan's overall approach that characterizes the Orthodox approach to any, difficult and unknown questions. It's very firmly, we don't know. We don't know yes, and we don't know no. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I'm just it sounds, maybe you can say, well, duh, it's just, we don't know until we know. But a lot of people do try to offer answers, very ready to hand, and pretend that they have knowledge that they don't. And I think the Orthodox spiritual tradition, we can remain confident in our own faith while saying there are questions we do not have the answer to at this time, and possibly will never have the answer to. So I think that's why I wanted, on the one hand, to talk about the spiritual, the reality or unreality of aliens. And on the other hand, I just wanted to talk about how we approach difficult questions, how we approach doubts. And I think this is good. To protect the truth from assumptions is like fighting with ghosts. This is why you will not find a denial of your theory in any respectable theological book. Theologians do not think that denial of dreams is reasonable. Imagine that a Polish rebellion is taking place. So he's writing in the Russian Empire, and at the time Poland was very much subjugated to the Russian Empire. So he's imagine that imagine that a Polish rebellion is taking place. You are in a command of a squad. You are approaching a forest, hear a noise, and see people with axes and smoke. It seems these are the rebels. However, should you command a fire, you could make an unforgivable mistake. These people can be the civilians who are cutting wood. You should make sure in advance whether they are rebels, how many of them there are, and what is their position. Only then can you retaliate against them. Why to engage if there is no obvious danger? Okay, so the translation's a little imperfect. He's saying, why engage? Why shoot until you know what you're shooting at? Why come up with all these arguments or ideas until you actually know the truth of the situation? It becomes silly. The same as this is with your thoughts. Make it obvious that there are inhabitants on celestial bodies, and then we will begin to deny any oppositions to our holy faith. Since the existence of the inhabitants on other planets is just a probability, the field of probabilities is limitless. Dreamers have a broad scope to work with. Perhaps the same happened to you. As soon as you began to assume something, your dreams enslaved you. Assuming that there are certain beings on other worlds, you begin to imagine their life, although you have no data for this. You had to limit your thinking to assumptions of their existence, on which there are certain hints, and tell yourself that you should dig deeper because of the lack of information. But you did. An inquiring spirit haunted you and enslaved you, but let it be so. So this is often the character of doubts when we have doubts about the faith. We actually latch on to a small amount of information and then fill in huge blanks with our own assumptions without sort of realizing or settling ourselves down, saying, hey, these are just assumptions. I'll give you an example, something that really, really like hung me up at one point, you know, a long time ago. So I noticed that, so you know, in Orthodoxy, right, we believe that the bread and wine on the altar is the body and blood of Christ, literally, supernaturally, it is transformed substance. But it looks like bread and wine, tastes like bread and wine, you know. Um, there's also in more traditional churches, so you don't see it in many Greek churches today, but you'll see it in monasteries, you'll see it in Slavic churches. At certain points, when the gifts, when the body and blood of Christ are being prepared, you close the curtain, you close the door, and so the altar is sealed off from the rest of the people. At one point, again, when I was just sort of coming into the faith, I concocted this whole story in my mind about how in ancient times, basically they were tricking you that it was the body and blood of Jesus Christ, when really they were just serving you bread and wine. And the reason they closed the curtain is to like enhance the deception. And now in the modern day, we know it's fake, but we have to kind of pretend. We have to kind of pretend and go along with it. And I concocted this whole kind of story in my mind about, oh no, you know, Orthodoxy is this big, I don't know, pyramid scheme based on trying to force yourself to believe this stupidity that's bread and wine is somehow transformed, yada yada. And part of the deception is the closing of the curtain. Again, my only data was that they close the curtain sometimes, but this entire theoretical construct was built on top of that small piece of data in my mind. But it really disturbed me, and it really hung me up. And then, of course, you know, going deeper and learning more, I found out no, the ancient Christians didn't have any kind of curtain, and they knew very well that what they were consuming looked like bread and wine and tasted like bread and wine. It's just that it also seemed to have these supernatural properties. My doubt had no basis, but it really did bug me. And again, it was latching onto one fact and really digging into it. And that's kind of what this woman is doing here. She's latching onto one idea. Well, if there are aliens out there, then that means God didn't create them, and that means God must not have created us. She's taking one small piece of data, which isn't even a piece of data. It's her own imagination, and building an entire construct on top of it. But she's letting it disturb her. It seems absurd from the outside, but when you're experiencing this, it can be quite heavy on you. So just be aware. You know, it's okay to have doubts, but it's important also to doubt your doubts. Okay, what are my assumptions going into this? What you know, how much evidence do I actually have for whatever's bothering me? Anyway, okay. There's nothing wrong with dreaming. However, it is rather dangerous to fall under the influence of dreams. You should dream carefully at the very least. For example, you could say so, it is possible that there are certain beings on other planets, but what can they be and how can their life be organized? Trying to solve this question, you should have thought about different options, but not focused on one particular variant because there's no reason to focus on one idea. Instead, you have picked up on one assumption, borrowed from your world, and focused on it. We had the falling in regards to sin, and so I think he means the fall. I think that's translations. We had the fall in regards to sin, and so did they. We tend to sin, and so do they. The Son of God became incarnate in our world, and consequently, only this way of salvation can be possible on other worlds. So there's another important thing he says. You should dream carefully at the very least. So in the modern day, like, it's so interesting. Like if you compare just like modern ways of thought with ancient ways of thought, because modern day we're like, the imagination's good, you know, imagination, creativity, you know, dream your biggest dreams, whatever. In pre-modern societies, and especially in Orthodox spiritual tradition, the imagination is something we treat very sort of cautiously. It's not. It can be useful to imagine things in certain times, but it's not an unmitigated good. There's many situations where just relying on your imagination just takes you off on flights of fancy in any direction, and takes you outside of real life. The imagination is something that has its purpose and has its use, but it's not. But it's something we should treat cautiously, basically, with regards to the faith, with regards to ordinary life, with regards to anything. There's, you know, the imagination can get us in all kinds of trouble. We can go into more in detail on that. You should have argued in the following way. Let us say there are sentient beings in other worlds. What did they do? Did they follow the commandments and the will of God, or did they violate the commandments and were disobedient? You can say neither. At the same time, I think that they could either sin or not, because in case of our ancestors, sin was not a necessity, but depended on their freedom. They fell, but they might not have fallen. The same concerns the inhabitants of other planets. They might either preserve the commandment or not. If they did preserve the Lord's commandment, then any further dreams regarding the ways of their salvation is senseless. So this is a little like what I was talking about. You know, doubt your doubts. Okay, interrogate. interrogate the thoughts you're having. Okay, well, if aliens exist, they must be fallen into sin while they're the way we're fallen. Well, why do you know that? Maybe they didn't. You don't, you can't say anything on the subject. So at least consider, multiple sides of the issue if you're going to be considering it. In this case, the beings are in the state of primal communion with God and holy angels. They enjoy living in a condition in which we all will be after the universal resurrection. However, you recognize their falling as doubtless and continue to develop that idea. Well, let us say that they also fell. However, can we say anything about the way of their salvation without knowing the extent of their sin? Maybe their sin was so small that it was possible to limit their salvation to the measure of correcting oneself. Otherwise, the sin could be so serious that it excluded such possibility. So there is the tradition that Adam, when he fell in paradise, and Eve, remember, God comes and speaks to them in the garden. The tradition is that actually if they had repented at that moment, then we would have been spared all this trouble that we're going through right now. They could have confessed their sin to God. They chose not to. So he's saying maybe that scenario applies to these aliens. Or maybe they're like the devil. They fell so hard that there's just no hope for them. We shouldn't. Why do we assume one way or the other if we assume they exist at all, which again is not a given. Finally, you have only one way of restoring yourself, the incarnation of God, his death on the cross and resurrection. We believe the divine economy was the free act of God, but not the act of necessity. The exceptional character of restoration in our world was adapted to our circumstances. However, we still cannot say that it was necessary. When he says it was necessary, he means that nothing compelled God to become incarnate. He did it completely freely. Like there was no force, no super God pushing God to become incarnate. He chose to do it because he loved us. It was not in any way out of necessity, out of being made to be. The church sings, "From a virgin didst thou come, not as an ambassador, nor as an angel, but the very Lord himself incarnate." Thus, it was possible for a mediator or an angel to become a savior. That's a big statement, but I think he's in the realm of speculation right now. He's not trying to make dogmatic statements here. He's just trying to entertain this woman's chain of thought. Or it might be a man, I don't remember. In the case of our world, the Lord himself wanted to incarnate, while in other worlds, a mediator or an angel or someone else could be the one who performed the act of salvation. If you trace the entire chain of these dreams, you will certainly face the next question. How could there be a possibility of salvation through the Lord Jesus Christ? Is it possible that he became incarnate there too? If it is difficult to answer this question, then why not recognize another way of salvation for the fallen there? There's no reason to stand on your own. He was saying, okay, all your other speculations are ridiculous, so why not add one more ridiculous speculation? But why go in the direction of doubt when you could go in the direction of faith? You are free to decide which idea to choose. At the same time, you should keep in mind that all these assumptions are nothing but dreams in which nothing can be entirely true. And this is just an important point in general. Whatever we imagine is different from the thing itself. Anything I imagine about what my life will be like in 1 year, will be significantly different from how my life actually looks in 1 year. Anything I imagined about, I was assigned to Holy Trinity Roanoke in August. Everything I imagined at Holy Trinity Roanoke, even though I had some true information, was completely different than in reality than it was in my mind. Our mental projections of things are never directly correspondent to reality. It's just a general truth about imagining anything ever. So be it. Therefore, any objections against the holy faith which come from such dreams are unsustainable. At first, you should learn about the life and condition of beings from other worlds and tell us all about it. Then we will solve the question of their salvation, and if you manage to form your objections against our teachings, it will be sustainable and worth denial. Until then, why should we bother about this? You have accepted one point of view, while there can be plenty of them. Assuming that other worlds are inhabited by sentient beings, you state that they were also created. But what if they were not created, but came there from Earth? What if Earth is aimed to become the spot of life on other planets? People could spread and settle on other worlds just like they have spread all over the earth from one place. The Lord said, "In my Father's house there are many mansions." This is interesting because he's writing really at a time, in the late 1800s, before many people have thought about like science fiction, about like the idea of human beings colonizing the stars, and he's already kind of anticipating that. And he's anticipating the fact that this was at a time, it wasn't until like the 1920s that we discovered that there were galaxies outside of our own galaxy. So he's also anticipating sort of certain questions about the vastness of the universe as well. It sounds really trivial because we grew up as children with stories about like space flight and traveling to different worlds, but it at the time, this was actually a revolutionary way to think about the world. This was a departure from the way anyone had ever thought ever. Why can we not recognize other planets as these mansions? Why can we not assume that people after their death live on this or that planet, on this or that sun, and will settle there with their bodies after the universal resurrection? Tell me, why our small Earth is honored so much? God does not divide his creatures into big and small ones. He loves them all and cares about them all of them equally. If he decided to make one planet the hotbed of people, then it did not matter which one exactly to choose for this purpose. No matter which planet to take, there is still the question, why is it chosen? Any of them will mean nothing in comparison with the whole universe. There is nothing to say against such an assumption. Furthermore, if we assume there are inhabitants on other planets, nothing prevents us from saying that they live according to God's will. They preserved their holiness and purity, did not violate God's commandments, and did not rebel against God, just as it happened on our own planet. Only Earth rebelled, while other planets remained quiet. However, God, who cares about any creature, did not abandon us. He organized the way for our restoration, which we accept with faith, and through which we find salvation. If the parable, a shepherd leaves 99 sheep and goes to look for one which is lost, we should not think that while the Lord cares a lot about the earth, other worlds are forgotten, and that after what was done on our planet, there is nothing he can do for other planets. The main goal of creation is God's glory and to show God's infinite perfection. In our world, they are expressed through the divine economy, while in other worlds, they can be expressed in a different way. If we assume that these sentient beings have a different way of life and blessing, it would be wiser to assume that they continuously live in the bright state of the blessing. Now let us assume they are fallen. There's no reason to think that they needed the incarnation and that had to occur on every planet. The power of incarnation and the sacrificial victim to save us through accepting them with faith. Why can we not say that the sacrifice made on Earth affected other planets as well? Why not to assume that the inhabitants of other planets find salvation in the same way? When it comes to faith, the Lord is infallible. There are even angels sent to those who want to inherit salvation. All the planets have a connection and affect each other, and we know nothing about this bond. He's actually talking about, I believe, the theory of gravity at the time, which was, controversial when Isaac Newton proposed it for the specific reason is that he proposed that things that are at a distance from each other act on each other with nothing in between them. And that was famously controversial, and he got attacked for it, saying, well, how can two things interact with each other without being touching in any way? And he famously said, hypothesis non fingo. I might be butchering that, but he said, I don't offer a hypothesis. I'm just saying this is how things are. But anyway, I'm just like trying to point out like the intelligence of St. Theophan. He knows he's talking about some really sophisticated stuff. In another of his letters, he does talk about like the science of his day. He's very intelligent. We cannot assume that one of them can be excluded from this union. And if there is a physical connection, then why can we not say there can be a moral one? If a celestial body affects other bodies physically, why can we not assume they affect each other morally too? This is all that came to mind, and I could say to comfort you. However, do not forget that all of these ideas are just probable assumptions, which we can live without and should continue to live without such assumptions. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Seek not out things that are too hard for thee, neither search for the things that are above thy strength, but what is commanded thee, think thereupon with reverence. For it is not needful for thee to see with thine eyes in things that are in secret. For many are deceived by their own vain opinion, and an evil suspicion hath overthrown their judgments. So, I hope you found some use in this letter. For me, this was very useful in sort of structuring my thinking, again, both about extraterrestrials and about doubt. With regards to the existence of life on other planets, we have no proof in the positive. And that is actually surprising from sort of a materialistic viewpoint. If you assume that life came into being, randomly through, natural processes, through just the interaction of chemicals in a primordial swamp, you have no reason to believe it shouldn't be happening all the time. Why didn't it happen on Mars? Why didn't it happen in Alpha Centauri? Why didn't it happen boom, boom, boom? It's called the Fermi paradox. It's the idea that what they don't tell you is the assumption behind it is materialistic. The assumption behind the Fermi paradox is that you know, life was not specially created by God. But basically, the Fermi paradox is that if, you know, life is produced naturally, where are all the alien civilizations? You know, we discovered in the 1920s that the universe is really, really, really big, really insanely mind-blowing big. And if life just sort of pops into existence the way it's theorized to have done on Earth, why is there no evidence that it did that anywhere? And sort of from a materialistic perspective, there are no good answers. And so since the you know, 1960s or 70s, there are various research programs working on detecting alien life in space, like called SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, where they have, you know, those big satellite dishes in the sky, trying to find sequences of information that don't look random, so that we can assume they're communications to or from aliens. And so far, they found nothing, like zip, zilch. It's possible they will find something someday. So again, that's why I really like St. Theophan's take. Okay, we don't hedge and say there are no aliens, there'll never be any aliens, because we don't know that, and maybe they will. But at the same time, it is kind of suspicious that we haven't found any alien. You know, if you take the atheistic, materialistic perspective on things, where are they? They should be there, but they're not. At least it doesn't seem that way right now. So that's just an interesting thought. And by the way, there's no proof of concept that life can arise by natural processes. This is what's referred to in biology as the theory of abiogenesis, the idea that life can come from non-life through the interactions of just chemicals and maybe zapped by a lightning bolt or something. You know, if you learned biology, you learned about the Urey-Miller experiment, where in the 50s they found out that you could produce certain compounds by putting a bunch of organic molecules in a test tube and zapping it with lightning. But then they actually never got much further than that. There's no proof scientifically that you can produce life from non-life. And in fact, as far as we can tell, we're very, 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 very far from anything even remotely. So yes, Michael Harding.
And if I may just make one minor comment on the Urey-Miller experiment, let's assume that they are correct in that front. You still need to refer back to the Fermi paradox. And okay, so you can create life through chemicals mixing and lightning striking it. All right, so where is it?
Right. So even if they do, even if they do prove it, which is certainly not a guarantee, you still have the issue of why isn't it popping up everywhere? Dawn Lewis raised a hand. Yes.
Yeah. One of the important parts of Fermi's paradox is something he called the Great Filter. Because the thought at the time was that we were all going to destroy ourselves in a nuclear holocaust. And so one of the thoughts is, like, where are they? Probably most of them are dead, because they get to this stage and they just fizzle out. And so that was one of the things that kind of guided his thought as far as other intelligences not being able to contact us, because they get to a certain point in their civilization and they cease to exist.
And that's certainly a possibility. I'm certainly not saying that the Fermi paradox is proof that no aliens exist or no aliens ever will exist. It is possible that aliens have existed and there are reasons why they'll never be able to contact us, or they've all killed themselves or whatever. But I'm just saying, as of right now, it doesn't. You would expect, even if there is this great filter, you'd expect maybe 1 in a million civilizations. I mean, there's so many galaxies out there. You'd expect someone to make it through the great filter. But again, maybe they don't, and maybe so that's a totally fair point, and it's a totally fair point. Okay, I can't remember where I got. So there might be aliens out there. There might not. We don't expect that there will be, but never say never. But when it comes to matters of our faith and our theology, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Again, we have positive reasons to believe what we believe is true. It's not. We don't believe in orthodoxy because of process of elimination. Oh, well, all the other things are wrong, so that means we must be right by default. No, we believe because certain things have been revealed to us. You know, what I really like in St. Theophan the Recluse, on the spiritual life and how to be attuned to it, he talks about some things he's experienced and that convinced him of the truth of Orthodoxy, like how he was with a holy ascetic one time, and while the ascetic was praying the Jesus prayer, he just started to glow, and Saint Theophan is just watching it like, whoa, like you know, that's pretty remarkable. Or he was also at the uncovering of the relics of Saint Tikhon of Zadansk, who had been dead for, you know, like a century, and they uncover his relics, and turns out he didn't rot. You know, that was made a strong impression on Saint Theophan. So the reason we say Saint Theophan is he's not just a dogmatist who says Orthodoxy is true because it has to be true and because I won't believe anything else, but he knows in a positive way through experience that Orthodoxy is true, and that's why these thoughts don't perturb him so much. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, if we come to it. And so that's why we call him a church father. He's not just an educated individual, but he's a man of deep spiritual experience, and he's educated, which is, it's rare to have super smart people, and it's rare to have super spiritually advanced people, and it's extremely rare to have people who combine the two, and those are the church fathers, basically. And those are the really, really remarkable, you know, earth-shaking people. Okay, so now that we have done our groundwork, we can get to the part that everyone was waiting for, and we can say a few things about the UFO phenomenon, which is, what is the UFO phenomenon? The UFO phenomenon is very broadly the modern day phenomenon of people claiming to have encounters in one form or another with otherworldly craft, like vehicles, like UFOs, and with otherworldly beings in the form of, you know, little green men landed on my front yard, or I was abducted. The UFO, when I talk about the UFO phenomenon, I'm talking about all this stuff. I'm just doing a blanket description of this sort of thing. And I called it a modern day phenomenon because it seems to have begun in earnest only after around 1945. You don't really, you don't really see this sort of thing before the 20th century, and even at that point after 1945, where the first the first big UFOs. I think there were maybe some a little before that, and you know, then there's the kind of thing when people say, well, this or that thing that happened in ancient Egypt was a UFO phenomenon, but maybe it wasn't, I don't know, but it seems significantly different. The UFO phenomenon seems to have begun in earnest around 1945, and the UFO people. The people who believe in it say it's because that's when we developed the atom bomb. So that's when other civilizations started checking in on us. That's the speculation. Anyway, Thomas, yes.
Yeah, adding to this, go back to the 1930s. One of the first radio broadcasts. I forget his name now, but there were creatures that came from Mars and they invaded Earth.
Oh, Orson Welles, yeah.
Yeah, Orson Welles. And people were committing suicide and everything else. You know, this is in the 1930s, so it goes back at least that far.
That's a very good point. Yeah, there was that famous Orson Welles wrote the famous book, The War of the Worlds, and then he did a reading of it on the radio, and supposedly, you know, it's about people from aliens from Mars coming to Earth and just totally just decimating everyone. Just like it's brutal. I read it a million years ago, and it's like not even fair. Like they just totally destroyed. And supposedly, I don't remember if it's an urban myth or true, but people took it seriously and they went into a panic, and some people killed themselves because they thought the radio broadcast was true. So this was in the culture starting at least by the 30s, like Thomas was saying. So it was kind of out there. Michael Harding has a hand, and then Benjamin.
Yeah, real quick. So depending on how you want to take it, so the radio, I think the first broadcast was like 1896, 1897. But Wells and War of the Worlds, that wasn't until like 1938. That was right before the World War kicked off. Mm-hmm. And then you can imagine what happened in 1939. So people probably had other things that they were worried about for the next few years. And then atom bomb gets dropped 45. So a whole bunch of kind of could be that was the moment that the aliens realized, oh, okay, we should start checking up on them. It could also be that War of the Worlds was read back in 1938, and okay, the war's over. Now let's start.
Right. It was out there in the culture and the mindset of people. Yes, Benjamin.
really, really early one that I had to look it up to confirm what it was, but I think it's one of the most famous like early examples. In 1561, in Nuremberg, in the Holy Roman Empire, an entire city apparently witnessed a battle, and they actually, in the same month, the news created a mural of it with like crazy shaped ships and like crosses and orbs and stuff flying over the city. And apparently an entire city saw it, and that's why they have this mural like framed in the city.
Well, I did not know about that. Okay, that's crazy. Nuremberg space alien battle in the 1500s. What's it called?
The mural, if you want to see it.
What's it called so I can Google it later?
Nuremberg 1561.
Nuremberg 1561. Thank you. That is wild. Okay.
The same month that it happened.
That's crazy. Well,
Conveniently, process.
Dawn
L raised a hand. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Also, in the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindi text, there are examples of stories of flying cities battling in the sky where gods are raining fire upon each other, that anyone who looks upon it is blinded and things like that. So
interesting. So yeah, okay. So in the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu holy book, there's stuff that I guess you're saying it sounds like UFO as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe I was wrong. So maybe I can amend my statement by saying this stuff started being called UFO in 1945, but perhaps it has a lot of precedent that I didn't know about. So thank you. This class is for me to learn as well as for you guys. But that's very interesting. And Father Seraphim Rose will have stuff to say about that as well. And okay, so starting in 1945 is when people is the first like flying saucer. I think, but it has precedent. But that's when the idea of, is particularly like the term UFO starts coming in circulation around then. And so the UFO phenomenon, for our purposes, we can say, just as Orthodox Christians living in the modern day, presents a conundrum. On the one hand, there are reasons to believe that the UFO phenomenon is more than just a flight of fancy. It seems to be more than just people's imagination. Why do I say that? First, it's because people who seem to have no prior interest in or belief in UFOs, or even inclination to believe in UFOs, sometimes report UFO phenomena and experience. So Father Spiridon Bailey, if you guys know this book, The UFO Deception, it's a very interesting book by an Orthodox priest. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but he talks about his wife in the UK saw a UFO with her whole family in the 1960s when none of them were UFO enthusiasts. None of them believed in that sort of thing, but they seemed to see this object flying along their car in the sky and then going in front of them and doing some stuff and then disappearing. And then it never had happened before, and it never happened since either. But it seems to be something these people didn't dream up or weren't inclined to make up. These weren't people who like love UFOs and are looking for them, and then they finally see one. It's these people who are suspecting nothing, just living their lives, have this encounter with an object. So that's what I mean. That's one of the reasons I say this is objective in a certain sense. I do use the word objective in air quotes for a reason, but it seems to be more than just people's imagination and more than just hoaxes. The other reason we might say it has somewhat of an objective quality is that many UFOs experiences are experienced by multiple people at once. So like we were saying, the Father Spiridon Bailey, his wife, it was apparently her whole family who saw it all together. There's a really interesting one. The one that, kind of broke my brain when I first found out about it is the Pascagoula abduction in 1973, I think. It's two men out in Alabama or was it Mississippi, who get abducted while they're out fishing at night with each other, or abducted when they're out fishing at night, and they get taken in for questioning by the police. And the police do something really interesting, which is they leave the room, but they leave a recording tape in there, unbeknownst to them, so that while the police are out of the room, they're kind of expecting them to start talking to each other. It's like, haha, we really got them, But instead, you can find the recording online. They just continue to talk to each other as though it was a real thing, and they're both super freaked out by it. So again, that's another situation where it does seem to be objective. It's somebody, however you interpret the incident, it seems like something actually happened to these men that really freaked them out. And there are other examples that can be given. Yes. Oh yeah.
So I've looked a lot into a phenomenon kind of like this because there's a lot of examples of this all over the place in ancient history. But it sounds like something called mass psychogenic illness. That for one reason or another, a group of people will experience something that didn't happen at all, but they all experience a like thing. And that's, I think the theory is supposed to be, hormone interaction between different people, that when it happens with one person and this sort of delusion starts, the hormone interactions create the same delusion in the other people's minds. But I mean, I've always found that interesting because, like, what is it? I think it's Fatima, that sort of miracle, the sun flying around the sky. Like, that was mass psychogenic illness because they're all staring at the sun and start hallucinating the same things. And this is really speculative explanations, because these are like sort of the idea of a mass psychogenic illness. I'm not sure you're going to find that in any DSM manual or anything like that. I don't know this. I don't know that there's any known mechanism by which human beings can hallucinate the same thing at once. I would have to look into that, but I'm guessing that these are sort of pseudoscientific explanations, because it raises a whole bunch of questions. Like, okay, if a whole bunch of people experience something at once, then how do we know it didn't take place? And what is this mechanism by which hormones from one person's body are interacting with hormones in another person's body in large enough quantities to have an effect on their mental state? So that's why I will look into this, but I'm skeptical about that idea. And it's a very interesting theory. I'm not sure how I feel about it.
Yeah. Yes.
It's also the Mandela effect in psychology. You know what that is?
Yes.
Yeah.
But you can explain it.
Okay. So.
I know that sounds like it's me saying that I don't know it, but I'm trying. It's when a bunch of people imagine that Nelson Mandela died or whatever, but he didn't actually. Yeah, so, but did he now? I don't know.
I don't remember. Like a group of people have like a event or something wrong in history, but the whole group of people come to like that same misremembered conclusion together. Like something happened, but it's just completely false. So.
Yeah, I would want to learn more about this myself as well, because my understanding of the Mandela effect, it was like a it was not super anyway. I'm having trouble articulating what I'm trying to say, so I'm going to drop it. But yeah.
Well, for Grace's point, we can do that test right now. Monocle or no monocle, and the monopoly guy. That's one of the Mandela effects, or like fruit of the loom, cornucopia or no cornucopia.
He definitely had one. I'm never gonna admit that it didn't.
Exactly, it did. I remember exactly being adopted and getting fruit of the loom, everything, and it always had a cornucopia, and then it didn't when I grew up. So, like, I'm positive that's a psyop.
But these are fair points, which is that there are psychological effects which can cause people to imagine or remember things wrong.
The cornucopia has been proven that it's not wrong. There's a lady that came out with a picture of showing the new fruit of the loom, and then the one that she has with cornucopia and a white tee.
Okay.
And the company came out and they're like, "Hey, look at all these logos that we have from 1920s. We've never had a cornucopia." But then she shows that picture with cornucopia, and you're like, wow, either my eyes are deceiving me or somebody's lying.
Interesting.
So it's like,
I've always been wary.
Well, anyway, the point is, people in groups can believe false things, can believe they experienced false things. I personally do not. I think there are enough of these situations that sort of strain that hypothesis. Like I said, for like the Pascagoula abduction seems really weird to me, and then I read a skeptical debunking of it, and then I said, I don't think this debunked anything at all. It's still super weird. And yes,
the last thing I probably said is actually the question I wanted to ask before your statement. There's a doctor in the military that studies like unrealistic deaths of like vets and stuff like that. There's a current court case going on. Basically, a lot of members of the military who had encounters with what you call UFOs or identified aerial vehicles, like Area 51 or
that brings me to another thing that reminds me. Sorry, go on.
They've suffered traumatic experiences when they touched the object or when they had that encounter, to the point where some died, some had very bad, like lost their mind basically completely and became like vegetable responsive and stuff like that. And the reason the court case right now is in the court system is because that information was mostly classified and not known to the public. It didn't pay out to the members of the family that got affected. So there's doc that came out, and he was on like a few different podcasts, but one of them was Joe Rogan, one of them was another one, and he's like the head doctor witness on that case. And there's 20, 30, 50 cases, something like that.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's another situation where people who don't seem inclined to make something up seem to be really at least convinced for themselves that they experienced something real, such that it has an effect on them. Another thing that you reminded me of is in certain ones of these situations where it's in contact with U.S. military equipment, it does, not only is it perceived by people, but it also registers on radar or something like that. So that's another suggestion in the direction of objectivity. Again, I'm still using that in air quotes. Mo Guns, sorry, it took me a while to get to you. There is an event not far from where I live called the 1955 Kelly Hopkinsville encounter. Basically, a family was attacked all night at their house. Police and army went out to investigate. Pretty wild stuff. Is that the one where they were like little silver monkeys or whatever? They were like, I read a book about that when I was a kid, and it terrified me. And again, that's one that's freaky. Again, you can put it down to some sort of group psychosis or something, but it really does seem that something weird happened, and that
they actually ended up shooting them, and they reported whenever they would shoot it, they would hear like metallic clanking.
And that it seems more than just misremembering whether or not Nelson Mandela died. It seems like these people experienced something more substantive than that.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that particular encounter is they never changed their story multiple times in interview throughout the years. Each individual family member kept the same exact story. Yeah,
so thank you for bringing that up. So that's one of the phenomenon sort of things I'm talking about, because there are some of these UFO encounters. I don't want to sound like I'm endorsing everyone who's ever said they've seen a UFO. Some of them might just be misinterpreting a plane flying by. Some people might just have some kind of delusion or psychosis. Some people might just be misremembering. But there seems to be enough that you can't neatly get rid of. They're just too weird to make sense of. Anyway, so on the one hand, these do something to be real at least in the sense that people are experiencing something, and it's not just pure hoaxes or imagination. On the other hand, it's extremely hard to make sense of UFO phenomena. So on the one hand, they do seem to be real. On the other hand, what do we do with them? They're inconsistent. One person's UFO experience can be completely different or opposite from another person's in terms of the beings they encounter, what they look like, how they act, what they want, in terms of what sort of craft they see in the sky, how they behave, what kind of message the aliens have. They can be completely different from one person to another, from one experience to another, and completely contradictory. And so that makes it seem not objective. Things that exist in real life, you expect to be congruent with one another. Things that have happened in people's imaginations, you expect would be able to contradict each other. So on the one hand, there seems to be something real. On the other hand, they seem to be it seems to be bizarre. And another thing about them is they often seem meaningless or absurd. So I remember. So here's an example. When a witness meets a UFO occupant who asks, "What time is it?" and replies, "It's 2:30," only to be bluntly told, "You lie, it's 4 o'clock." This happened in France in 1954. That seems a completely bizarre and pointless encounter. Some alien comes to tell you, to ask you what time it is, and then you tell him the time, and he says, "No, you're wrong." It doesn't say which of the two was actually right, but that seems strange. There's another one Father Seraphim Rose talks about, which is individual close encounters have absurd details, like the 4 pancakes given by a UFO occupant to a Wisconsin chicken farmer in 1961. So an alien shows up and gives a chicken farmer 4 pancakes. these encounters are bizarre and or at least many times they don't seem to have been a point. And I think the Kelly, the 1955 Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, I think that's the kind of one that falls under this. The aliens show up and they besiege the house or whatever, and then nothing happens, and then they're gone, as far as I can tell. So what was the point? What were they doing there? Or if aliens are abducting people to probe them, they should have probed enough people at this point. Why does it, they should know everything there is to know.
Unless they're really stupid.
Unless they're really stupid. That's a new hypothesis in ufology.
It doesn't make sense how they
Yeah.
more advanced.
Yeah. So yes.
I mean, like, for me, I don't know. I've never found those sort of like bizarre encounters to be that unbelievable. Because like, if you look at how normal people act, I mean, just look at my household. Me and my siblings do things that make absolutely no sense all the time, and it's only gotten like with us. Like, we'll go up to one of the chickens and we'll like wiggle their comb or something. They don't understand what in the world that means, but to us, we just find it funny. So I could totally see like if there were aliens just doing nonsensical things purely for their own humor, and us just going, "What's wrong with them?"
So that is something the UFO enthusiasts say, is that, well, how could we make any sense of their motives? They're so far beyond us. They're like they're like a human being, and we're like the chickens getting our combs wiggled. Maybe that's so that, I mean, that's a reasonable thing to point out. Maybe they are really aliens, but their goals are just so far beyond our understanding that we'll never make sense of them. But at least for our purposes, as people trying to make sense of UFO phenomena, we cannot readily do that. They're strange. They contradict each other. They don't seem to have a point, at least in terms of what we'd expect. And they also are seen to do things that seem to defy physics as we know it, right? So there'll be instances of alien craft that it's just like one object, and then it splits into 5 smaller spheres, and then they come back together and they're one object again. Things like that seem to defy even, that's beyond the ability even of a aircraft we could imagine, right? That would be technology of an order that's so outside of what we could even think. Yes.
There's a really famous Air Force video where the Air Force pilot is using a like highly advanced military radar, or not radar, camera that's tracking this thing going like 600 miles an hour, and then it just immediately goes the other direction for breaking the laws of reality, basically.
Yeah.
Gravity.
It totally has. Is that the one that was from like 2008 or whatever, the U.S. Navy?
It might have been, yeah. It's
So
like
that
it's a little black thing being tracked by a black and white.
Yeah. So that was one of the ones that affected my thoughts on the UFO phenomenon, because the guy who tracked that was a guy named David Fravor. He was an Air Force pilot, and so out of completely happenstance, a woman at my old church also flew. She was a Navy pilot, and she flew in his unit and knew him personally. And apparently, he wasn't. People asked him, and he stuck to his story. And of course, there's like the video evidence of it being picked up on the U.S. military. So something happened. Again, not something we can easily or readily explain, but something more than just him making something up. Michael Harding raised his hand.
Hey, won't talk too much on this topic. If anyone's looking for an interesting rabbit hole to dive down after we're done tonight, go ahead and look up the patents put out by Salvatore Pais, P-A-I-S. He is a PhD at Naval Research Laboratories, and many of his patents are joint with the U.S. Navy. I will leave it at that.
Salvatore Pais. Okay, interesting. Thank you. So on the one hand, UFO phenomena seem to be happening, and they seem to be more than just people's imagination and hoaxes. And on the other hand, they don't seem to make clear sense, and they don't fit neatly with a Christian or a materialistic, atheistic view of the world. So on the one hand, we Christians, like I said, we're still going to believe, even if it turns out aliens exist, because we still have every good reason to believe that our faith is true. But it's not what we expect. It's not what we predict. On the other hand, the atheistic, skeptical types are even more zealously against aliens, or at least encounters with UFO phenomena. They're the ones always trying to debunk it or disprove it or what have you. So basically, no one's happy with UFO phenomena, but we need to figure out somehow to make sense of it. Yes, Evgeny.
What if it's a deception?
Interesting. You anticipated where we're going with this.
I've been
Okay.
thinking about that since the beginning. I was like, the
So-
U.S. military has been reported to have this
It would
technology.
make
for a long time.
sense. Have you ever heard any countries agree on anything all at once? But then 159 agreed not to go to Antarctica right after World War II. That whole
So now Antarctica's in play, and I don't even know what to do with that.
well, because the Nazis spent billions of dollars of like exploring it. They had different maps, and they believed, there was the extraterrestrials that they were looking for. That's where they resided. Is what they kind of believed, or that's where their ships were hidden.
Interesting.
So the whole theory of it is like being Hitler trying to succumb to new power. So he's like searching outside sources so he could win the war.
Mm-hmm.
And they find something. I just find it weird to be like, I've never heard 159 countries agree on anything simultaneously.
That's interesting. That's
like, 100
so when
Europeans.
you said a deception, you mean a human deception. That's one I wasn't.
But, Satan does work through humans with his deception, so we don't even know.
So yes, okay. So it could be a government deception. I mean, that's what the ufologists generally go for. Is that the governments, U.S., Russia, China actually have alien craft and everything. There's a big whistleblower about a year ago. I forget his name, but supposedly he was very credible, or at least Grush, yeah, something like that. And I was a little surprised because apparently everyone was saying, oh, he's a real deal, former Air Force or whatever, has a certain level of clearance. He should know what he's talking about. So he goes out and he testifies in Congress, and basically nothing came of it. Which is another thing Father Spiridon Bailey actually brings up, which is good, which is that throughout the history of ufology and UFO enthusiasm, there have been a number of points of anticipated disclosure, where the UFO enthusiast says, this is it, this is the time it's going to be revealed, and all the secrets going to be laid bare, and then it never comes. So there is this pattern of expectation and then nothing. So that should temper kind of our expectations. Every few years, someone comes up and says, the proof is about to be revealed, and then so far nothing. Maybe in the future, but that makes me suspicious that it's never happening because it's not there. Michael, another thing, sorry, was that WikiLeaks, when they uncovered all of those huge amount of documents from the Iraq War, which was really interesting. Was that around 2012 or something? Like, I remember when that happened. They even said, yeah, we hacked all these government computers. Really didn't find anything about aliens. It was all just about war crimes. But yeah, Michael Harding, you had raised the hand?
Oh, never mind. Okay.
So anyway, so I don't think the government knows much more than we do, but some people do think that, and that's legitimate. I mean, I can't, prove that the government doesn't have some shadowy organization as part of it. Maybe it does. I don't know. I personally don't think so, because it's been anticipated so many times and fallen through. Yes.
This is just my stupid theory, but I think that everyone at this point is so ready and expectant that aliens, quote unquote, exist outside of our world. And the reason that they're not saying anything right now is because it's a spiritual phenomenon and not a sci-fi tech, like high tech race phenomenon. And that's why it would cause chaos in the world. That, oh, there's aliens. Everyone, if there were aliens now and they revealed it, we'd be like, thank God, finally, we have an answer we all knew was coming. But it's probably a lot more sinister than that. That's probably what's in that book.
Yeah, well, that's where we're going with this, is the approach to UFOs as a spiritual phenomenon. So the most interesting resources, and candidly, probably the only two existing resources on the subject, are Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future by Seraphim Rose. Absolute classic. I really strongly recommend you guys read this book. It's very interesting. Again, not because of every single conclusion he draws, but just he has a very orthodox mindset with approaching these things, and so it's good. It's good. And then the UFO Deception, which is recent, by Father Spiridon Bailey. I would read this one second because it basically piggybacks off of Father Seraphim Rose's work. Father Spiridon does add his own stuff, but a lot of the sources he uses are the same ones Father Seraphim uses. He just expands on them and dives deeper. Basically, they take the position that UFO phenomena are spiritual, that is to say, demonic in nature. and some of the evidence they bring to bear on this is that there's a big connection between the occult and the UFO phenomenon. So a lot of new religious movements are started by people who claim to have received messages from aliens. A lot of people who experience UFO encounters have strange dreams just before seeing them, or they hear knocks on the door when no one's there, or have strange visitors afterwards. Some witnesses receive telepathic messages from UFO occupants. UFOs sometimes materialize and dematerialize. Sometimes people have miraculous healings prior to their UFO encounter, but they also sometimes have personality deterioration, insanity, and suicide. So there it seems to be this whole it's not just like you see a person in ordinary life. There seems to be this whole psycho-spiritual dimension of the UFO encounter that these people are having, and that's one of the reasons they think it's a spiritual phenomenon. Another reason they think it's a spiritual phenomenon is because a lot of the stories are absurd. Like, how do they have this super advanced technology and they're crashing into Earth all the time? Like they have this really high tech stuff, but they can't drive it. They're just crashing here, crashing there, crashing ever. Like
that's been my biggest point in all this is they can go across the entire galaxy, but hit one rock, which in the actual scheme of things is like you tripping over a pebble. Like how do you even do that?
Right, and that's a legitimate question. Or why do they need to probe so many people? Don't they have enough information by that? Sorry to circle back to that, but anyway, so it doesn't make sense that these things would be extraterrestrials, at least not as we understand them. Yes, Eugene, Evgeny, Zhenya, I'm sorry, however you want to go by.
Oh, it's okay. It also reminds me when that were born ritualistic type of shamans involved in ayahuasca and DMT products of some sort, that even though they're located on different continents, but a lot of those people experience meeting the same entities while they're under the influence of those particular substances.
Yeah, so there is the phenomenon of people who take certain drugs report seeing the same sorts of creatures. I've heard the term machine elves thrown around. And so some people, I was listening to, there's a writer named Rupert Sheldrake who I like, but he's a little nuts about some stuff. And who seems to be favorable to the idea that some of the things you encounter on drugs are actual. So I don't know. Maybe they are. Who am I to say they're not? But I don't know. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that there is the idea that UFOs are a spiritual phenomenon and not just a material phenomenon. It actually has explanatory power. It makes sense in a certain way. It's not just like, well, there ain't no aliens in my Bible, so they must be demons. It's not just like a fundamentalist reaction, but it actually seems to explain the phenomenon in a certain way. Why are these things seem real, but they're also so immaterial and contradictory? Well, the demons do try to confuse and do try to deceive. I do think, by the way, there's something similar going on with near-death phenomena, which Father Seraphim Rose also writes about. I think he's very insightful on these things. Why do the UFO phenomena have these particular characteristics they have? Well, it doesn't really make sense if they're aliens, because again, why are they crashing all the time? So it doesn't make sense that they're hoaxes because they seem to be real. Well, what's another option? Well, demons. These do seem at least reasonably consistent with what a demon would hope to accomplish, which would just be to sow chaos, sow confusion, disturb people, like you talked about with the certain soldiers who had encounters with these things and then were driven insane by it. The explanation makes sense of the fact that the phenomena appear to be real but absurd and inconsistent. Again, this isn't a dogmatic position. There's nothing, to be an Orthodox Christian, you don't have to say aliens are real and they're demons, but it's just a way of approaching the phenomenon, which to me seems to make the most sense. The other And then they'll take it a step further, like Father Seraphim Rose, looking at UFOs along with a host of other spiritual phenomena that became big in the 60s, like charismatic Christianity and New Age spirituality and stuff, saying that this could be the preparation for the Antichrist. And again, it makes logical sense, right? If Antichrist is going to come and rule the world and he's going to have miracles, what's a great way to perform miracles without reference to God? Well, you could say, "Oh, I'm an alien. These aren't miracles. This is just my technology that you don't understand," or something like that. You know, it would be a great deception, a way to get people on board your spiritual program without thinking they're being on board a spiritual program. Their mindset's been totally secularized, and they're viewing it through a purely materialistic lens. Again, not saying that Antichrist is going to come and he's going to present himself as an alien, but I'm saying it's an interesting way to think about these phenomena, and it's consistent with the Orthodox faith. Juan, you had raised your hand?
It was an accident. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. So that's it basically. I mean, I'm not giving any firm conclusions or anything. I'm just trying to walk through these ideas and see how we can approach them from sort of an Orthodox angle. This is not a dogmatic matter of our faith. Like I said, maybe you think I'm stupid and nuts for bringing this up, and maybe I am. I don't know. Maybe they're all hoaxes or they're all imagination or something. But I'm just you can believe that. But Mo Guns, raise your hand. Yes.
Yeah, just not putting forth anything concrete here, but I do find it interesting that in recent years, Hollywood and media in general has almost seemed to normalize UFOs and put it out there in the public field to get everybody almost like primed and more acclimated to it. So if this is a spiritual, sinister situation, we all know how evil Hollywood is. So.
Yeah, so that's a point Father Seraphim Rose makes as well. It does people. You could definitely make the point that Hollywood is trying to warm people up to these ideas and just make you favorably disposed to this sort of thing. Like Father Seraphim went nuts when they had a ad for E.T. and it was like a Christmas scene, and E.T. was the baby Jesus in the manger. He was like, that's Antichrist for sure. And it's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yes.
I mean, where you mentioned about how it really became popularized early in the 90s as well, it stands to reason that Satan is going to want to piggyback off the most materialistic, atheistic thing that's gripping the world.
Right.
I mean, as soon as everyone started getting interested in the idea of traveling stars, it was just that was it.
Yeah.
Like that's all people have been. That's what humanity has been apparently driving towards for the last 100 years. So it would make sense for Satan to want to like divert our attention from the spirituality of the world and towards,
right,
here's this thing that was going to disprove the spirituality of the world.
Right. It does seem like if this is a demonic deception, it makes perfect sense because it's a means of getting people's minds completely away from Christ or even anything supernatural, and getting them on board with some other higher intelligence. Yes.
Do you have any references in the Bible to demons possessing unbiological things? Like in Mark 5, the unclean spirit went from the man to the pigs, but is there ever a time where it's like it possesses something not alive?
That's interesting. That's a really interesting question. The idea that most immediately comes to my mind is not from the Bible, but it's from the great spiritual classic of the Orthodox world, which is the Life of Saint Anthony, which is basically that the demons inhabited tombs. So they didn't possess an object per se, but there was a place where they hang out. And that is, in the tombs among the corpses and the stench. So there is this idea in Orthodoxy that there are physical places demons can be without inhabiting anybody or anything. But as far as possessing an object in specific, I don't know. It's an interesting idea. Yes.
Just reminds me of a discussion I had with a Catholic a long time ago. We were discussing miracles. And so he was saying that, demons couldn't make things appear in the world. They couldn't affect the world. And I think the most interesting thing to read in the Bible that that went against that was reading the book of Job. Like, if you go read the book of Job, Satan asks, "Hey, can I do this?" God goes, "Okay, sure, you can do this on this condition," and then he goes and does that. And that shows like they have the ability to, like, for example, create a wind that knocks down an entire house and kills his entire family. Like, there we see they can impact the world. And I would certainly bet if they can create a gust of wind strong enough to blow down a house and kill people out of nowhere, they can definitely make the appearance of an object or create illusions. I would not be surprised at all.
So that's actually in the life of St. Martin of Tours, and Father Seraphim references it as well, where they make I forget what specifically happened in the life of St. Martin, but the demons make a cloak, and a physical object that's given to somebody, and it's handled and touched by a bunch of the disciples until it just disappears from their eyes at one point. So they do seem to be able to create like something material. Yes.
Who's to say any of it has to be material, though? If I mean, there are countless examples.
Thank you for joining us, Jordan. God bless you. Have a good night. Well, and we'll close down soon because I know we're over time, but it's just an interesting conversation.
There are countless examples in like the church fathers where, like, there's one famous monk from the Kiev caves, I believe, who had a angel who was a demon disguising himself as an angel, tell him to stop praying. I'm going to pray for you. You're familiar with that one. If all of these UFO encounters are so confusing and psycho-spiritual, you said something like psycho-spiritual.
Psycho-spiritual, yeah.
Like, who's to say any of it even needs to be physical? It could just be projected into the minds and
that's an interesting idea.
Looking at it.
That's a really interesting idea.
Reality, because it's not actually in reality.
So I have heard that actually, with the idea that like demons cannot pray and they can't make the sign of the cross, but they can make you think that they prayed, and they can make you think they made the sign of the cross to kind of, if they have that level of power over you. That's interesting. Yeah. Want to say something? Sorry, Michael, you had your hand raised.
No, only thought is, okay, so we go in, the demons can't truly do things, but that, I mean, would it not follow that they can if they are given permission? So
yeah, they can. I think
Satan cannot torment Job without permission, but he is given permission, therefore.
Right. They can, demons, there's no doubt within Orthodoxy that demons can do things that have physical effects. It's true. There's a really interesting, actually, something from the letters of St. Joseph of Hesychast, where sometimes if demons aren't able to get you through temptation, and so it's significant in the life of St. Joseph of Hesychast that he totally overcame the temptation of anger, and he totally overcame sexual temptation. So they just started beating him. They just started wailing on him. The same thing happened to St. Anthony. But there's an interesting event in the letters of St. Joseph of Hesychast, if you read, this was in like the 50s or 40s or something, but some layman goes to stay with them, and St. Joseph lets, ascetic that he is, lets the layman like stay in his hut, and St. Joseph sleeps outside, or I don't know, whatever monks do. And so the layman actually ends up getting beaten up, and he's so terrified he runs away from the monastery, and they're trying to get him to come back. And he said, "No way, I'm never, like, after my experience." So it's interesting, but yes, Dawn.
So one kind of additional take on this. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine that we've been friends since high school, and he's not just atheist; he's almost anti-theist.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of never got out of that edgy teenage stage, and but he is a firm believer in simulation theory.
Yeah,
and he actually believes that our universe is programmed by a being from the fifth or sixth dimension. And so I was just kind of having a theistic discussion with him, and I'm like, okay, well, what would you call this omniscient, omnipotent programmer,
right,
that can peer into this world and controls it? And because I call it God. And then it was the same concept with angels and demons. If that programmer were to send different sprites down into the program to affect the lives of these little programs you have running, what would you refer to those? And I was just trying to draw parallels to try to trip him up, but he's one of my favorite people to talk to about stuff like that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, after a certain point, it's just like, if you're talking about something all powerful and omniscient and able to influence and affect reality, I mean, at one point it's like, okay, well, is it just some super powered nerd in its mother's basement, or I mean, on one level, it makes no functional difference from our perspective, right? You better start worshiping either way. But I mean, I'm being silly a little there, but it's like, okay, you sort of can't avoid, in my opinion, you can't avoid theistic conclusions. Like if you think really hard about certain things, like it's just like there's no way to make sense of stuff. But I don't know.
Well, you think about atheism as a whole. You can be agnostic, but you can't be atheist. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Because the smartest human on earth can't have more than like 2% of all knowledge. So
Yeah.
How egotistical do you have to be in order to claim you're an atheist when you don't know 98% of everything?
Teenager.
Yeah, I'm strongly sympathetic to that reasoning, because it's like, just I can definitely see being a radical agnostic and just saying I don't know anything that's going on.
Yeah.
I can't make sense. Like, I'm sympathetic to that point of view, because the world is weird and confusing and just tons of stuff happens. But yeah, to take a step further and say no, there's no God. I don't know. I can't do that. Anyway, okay. Anyway, we've derailed, but I've enjoyed the conversation. I hope you have too. I'm going to let everyone go, but you can hang around and talk still, but I'm just ending the class. I'm ending the recording. Okay. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life. Truly, the Lord is risen. God bless all of you. Have a good night. It's nice to be back. I'll see you next week. We'll talk about, I don't know. We'll talk about something.